We begin this morning with millions of kids and teachers returning to school, uncertain of how COVID will impact the rest of their school year. The U.S. is averaging nearly 400,000 new infections every day, the highest number since the pandemic began. And hospitalization rates among kids are skyrocketing. The 7-day average between December 21st and December 27th was up more than 58%. Experts are calling for all parents to get their children vaccinated immediately. Several New Jersey school districts have already transitioned to remote learning in light of the rising COVID cases, but public schools in New York City are opening today under a new test-to-stay policy. We'll get into that, and we also have NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel standing by to answer all of our COVID questions. First, though, we'll bring in NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber outside of PS 163 with the latest on New York City's return to school. Ellison, good morning. Thanks for being out there. I know it's cold this morning for us. So give us some context here. Walk us through the COVID policy. What does this mean, test to stay? How's this going to work?
In short, it is a dramatic increase in testing and also a change to the quarantine policy. Previously in New York City schools, if a student tested positive for COVID-19, they would have any of those students' close contacts quarantined for 10 days, regardless of their vaccination status, regardless of symptoms. So in theory, you could have an entire classroom at home quarantined. Under the new plan, that will change. If there is a positive COVID case, teachers will distribute at-home testing kits to the entire classroom so that students can test on the first and fifth day since exposure. Students can continue to attend school as long as they test negative and do not have any symptoms. If a test comes back positive, then it's a 10-day quarantine for that particular student who tested positive. In addition to all of that, New York City schools, they already have a weekly PCR testing at school. That amount of accessibility is expected, and it is supposed to double, according to both the mayor and the governor. It's something that students have to opt into. Their parents have to give consent, but they can be tested at school, and staff as well, regardless of vaccination status, twice a week. That's double of what they had previously. Savannah?
Interesting there also, and I think this leads to so much of the confusion that some of those guidelines just here for New York City schools is different, is more strict in some cases than CDC guidance is now as we kind of walk through all this. Ellison, how are teachers, though, feeling about this, about the decision to keep schools open this week as these COVID cases reach record levels? What did they tell you about reopening? Are they feeling pressure to return to work? Are they feeling safe?
You know, some are incredibly apprehensive. The United Federation of Teachers, the president put out a statement almost as soon as this plan was released and announced last week, saying that it's a step to making schools safer, but not quite there yet. And they said that they had concerns about whether or not there really will be the level, the number of tests that have been promised available to every staff, every student, with every single school in New York City. Teachers, they have told us that they feel nervous about returning to school and feel like the school district has not done enough to ensure that it would be a safe return given where things are in terms of New York City's infection rate. Listen.
I am extremely concerned. I'm terrified. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm thinking about all my students. I'm thinking about all my colleagues.
I'm feeling really frustrated and angry because the Department of Education has had 2 years to prepare us for this. Teachers have been saying, educators, school workers have been saying for 2 years what we need in order to have in-person schooling be safer.
I'm worried for more for the people who are maybe immunocompromised, for younger students who aren't able to have the vaccination, and for the families of my students who may have people who are immunocompromised at home.
This is the nation's largest school district with over 1,800 schools and about 1.1 million students. Savannah?
All right, Ellison Barber, thank you so much for kicking us off this morning. Let's now bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel for more on this. Dr. Patel, good morning. Happy New Year. Always great to see you. So New York City Mayor Eric Adams is also considering a booster shot mandate for all city workers. What do you make of this? Will that be enough to bring down cases in New York City? And something like, let's say, maybe a bunch of teachers getting sick, which then means there's staff shortages. Do you think a booster shot can help there, or do we not really know with this variant?
Yeah, Savannah, Happy New Year and glad to see you safe, back and healthy. So with respect to boosters, they can definitely help, but it's not clear that it's going to make an immediate dent. We know boosters work effectively immediately, but with so much Omicron in the community and cases spreading so quickly, it's difficult to imagine a scenario where it has such a significant dent, Savannah, that you have a lot of these teachers that are able to come back. So it's going to have to be an emphasis on boosters, knowing that that may not necessarily show up in how much a teacher is absent because of quarantine or isolation that particular week, but perhaps weeks later.
And let's talk about that quarantine isolation period and some of the confusion going on here. So cases are going up across the country, as we've all been hearing about, as we've just been talking about, but the CDC is continuing to receive backlash for those new isolation guidelines that they put out there. But Dr. Anthony Fauci says those guidelines could be changing again soon. Let's first listen to some of that.
You're right. There has been some concern about why we don't ask people at that 5-day period to get tested. That is something that is now under consideration. The CDC is very well aware that there has been some pushback about that. Looking at it again, there may be an option in that testing could be a part of that. And I think we're going to be hearing more about that in the next day or so from the CDC.
So, Dr. Patel, what do you make of that potential change? Do you think those updated guidelines that Dr. Fauci just potentially mentioned there are necessary at this time? And also, what do you just make of this confusion? I mean, the fact we hear from Ellison a moment ago, teachers who test positive, students who test positive in New York, it's 10 days, CDC's 5 days without symptoms. What does this all mean for everyone?
Yeah, I think it means chaos when people are confused. And by the way, many health professionals themselves are confused over how to give advice to patients because it's not so black and white.
Yeah.
I think that chaos is leading to people who are unintentionally going to work and could be infectious still. And then unintentionally, employers kind of putting pressure on employees, and perhaps intentionally, to make an environment where they feel they have to come back, and all with schools and childcare trying to stay open. But I do think that this test to kind of determine if you're still infectious is incredibly critical. I think it's going to come, though, with some really tough questions about the fact that we don't have enough tests for everyone to do this. With so many cases, we simply do not have enough rapid tests to make that type of kind of 5-day accommodation possible today. I'm hoping the administration, if they change this, can answer some of that need.
And let's talk about what it sort of does mean if you do get a case right now and what the severity of these cases is looking like. So we have an example. Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III has tested positive for COVID and says he's experiencing mild symptoms. He's one of several people in Washington to test positive. I had COVID, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Mine was quite mild. I'm vaccinated. Have vaccinations stopped these cases from being more severe? And what do you think, what would you say to somebody who didn't get the vaccine yet and thinks, well, everybody's still getting it anyway. Do I really need it? Does this help with the severity?
Yeah, if you're unvaccinated, let me be clear, not only are you 31 times or higher, according to some recent data in Omicron, more likely to both get infected and then possibly also related is being in the hospital and death, no matter what age, by the way, young people, older people, of course, at higher risk. So vaccination matters. And I think you're absolutely right. In your case, in this defense secretary, several senators, we're now reading about people every single day, very prominent public figures who are experiencing positive cases, mild symptoms to no symptoms. That is absolutely a byproduct of vaccinations and intentional booster doses where applicable. So I do feel very strongly in encouraging patients, by the way, not too late to go ahead and start a vaccine series. It may not take effect again today, but we're not looking at the last, unfortunately, of surges. I hope this is the worst, but not the last.
All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, as always, thank you for your insight here. Good to see you. Now, travel chaos is continuing across the country. The spread of the Omicron variant, as we've been talking about, combined with winter storms, created a real mess for Americans trying to fly this weekend. Airports across the U.S. were filled with stranded flyers desperate for a way home. Get this, more than 2,700 flights were canceled yesterday, and today, more than 1,700 flights have already been canceled.
Never seen the line like this ever in, 10 years. We're not even going to make it. I'm just going to rebook it till tomorrow.
So far, it's a little bit wild in here. I've seen some things. I'm ready to go.
Makes me uneasy. You know, just a lot of uncertainty on whether or not we're going to get home today or tomorrow.
Joining me now with more on these travel issues is Melanie Lieberman, senior editor at The Points Guy. Melanie, good morning. So I have to say, I was in an airport this weekend coming back from seeing family. I was so worried that I was not going to make it because of how many people are experiencing that. Luckily, I did. But walk us through how bad some of these situations have been over the weekend and which airports have experienced the worst amounts of delays and cancellations.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you made it where you're going. We are seeing just thousands of flights have been canceled really since prior to Christmas. And it does not look like it's going to improve for at least a few more days. We're seeing not only the issue with staffing shortages caused by flight crew members and airline crew members, staff members calling out sick because of the variant, but also the weather. So we've had a lot of issues in Denver, Chicago, places where the weather and those typical holiday flying troubles are compounding with the COVID variant to cause a lot of issues for people all across the country trying to get home from the holidays.
And Melanie, what advice do you have for one of these people who's stuck at an airport, stranded right now, trying to fly today? What should you do if you're dealing with a canceled flight or if you're just concerned that there's a potential yours might be?
As frustrating as it can be, the most important thing to be thinking about right now is being flexible. And so if you are one of those people who is currently stranded or facing a severe delay or cancellation, the thing to do is think about your backup plans. So if you are flying into a major metropolitan area, see if there is another airport you can fly into. Even if it's not as convenient, it might still get you where you're going faster. We want travelers to be thinking about going to the airline with their ideal scenario. If you're looking for compensation, if you want to be put up at a hotel, anything that you can think of that will make the experience better for you is what you should be asking for. So we really want travelers to feel empowered to make those decisions in advance.
And Melanie, before I let you go, so when do you think this headache will be over?
We are anticipating that there will still be issues in the days to come. Fortunately, we are entering that slightly quieter period for people who are traveling in the weeks to come. Things could improve, but in the next few days, it's still really a toss-up as we're looking at more bad weather. And I don't think we're on the other side of this in terms of staffing shortages right now.
Oh, all right. Melanie Lieberman, thank you so much for walking us through that. Now let's stay on some of that bad weather, and it does seem like much of the nation is in actually weather whiplash with mild temperatures across the country on Saturday, then freezing weather and snow moving across the country this morning. So what can you expect in your area? Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather with Bill Cairns. Bill, good morning. I missed you. Happy New Year.
Yeah, good morning. Glad you're all better, and Happy New Year to you. And yeah, it's been a wild ride to start 2022. We had areas that were 80 degrees, and then the next day they saw sleet and snow. And one of those spots was in Alabama and Mississippi. It snowed last night, and they set record highs as they rang in the New Year. So yeah, weather whiplash. I mean, we knew winter had to arrive sooner or later, but you know, this is Coleman, Alabama. I saw pictures of people in Huntsville, Alabama, going down hills on sleds and even snowboards. So yeah, winter has arrived, and now this wintry mess is all moving through the mid-Atlantic. And this is the first snowstorm of the year. This will be the biggest snowstorm in 3 years for Washington, D.C. Now, it's a narrow band of heavy snow. Not everyone is getting it. Sorry, New York City. Sorry, Hartford, Boston. No snow for you. But from Philadelphia southwards to Richmond, that's the area that has the best chance of getting the snow out of this. We've already seen some pretty heavy snow in the mountains of North Carolina overnight, and that continues this morning. We even do have a tornado watch until 11 a.m. We've had very strong winds around South Carolina, Charleston this morning. We have 500,000 people without power in areas of the southeast. So I'm not so concerned with a ton of tornadoes, but these strong winds will move through. So for today, heavy snow for the morning commute. I know a lot of the schools are already closed from the D.C. area to Fredericksburg to Richmond, all the way through southern New Jersey. Preemptively, they just closed the schools. They didn't want the kids trying to get to school in the middle of a snowstorm. So here's the timing of it. So here's where we are now. And as we head through the middle of the day, this storm is in and out in a hurry. So by noon today, the snow is over in Roanoke. It's ending in D.C. So this is really just a quick hitter early this morning, a lot of heavy snow, and then it is gone by about 6 p.m. The only people left getting any snow will be Cape Cod and the islands. So how much snow are we talking? For the D.C. area, there's still the possibility that we could end up with up to 8 inches of snow. Wow. That's the high end of the totals. Richmond, right around 3 to 6. Philly, around 1 to 3. Notice that cutoff line north of Philadelphia, little to hardly any snow whatsoever. So for Savannah, snowy travel to say the least in the mid-Atlantic, but not our turn yet in New York City. Maybe Friday for areas in New England. That'll be our next chance of a snowstorm for us.
All right. It certainly was weather whiplash, Bill. It was actually colder in San Diego, where I was part of the weekend, than it was when I landed back here in New York. I was like, what is going on? Is it January or not?
Yeah, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah. All right, Bill. Thank you so much. Good to see you. Now, in Colorado, crews are searching for 2 people missing since last week's devastating wildfire. The fire destroyed nearly 1,000 homes, and people are just now getting a chance to see what's left behind. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa has the latest.
Well, in a positive development, officials say that one person who was unaccounted for has been found alive and well. Still, they say 2 people are missing and feared dead. You can see why the search process is so complicated. Not only are they having to contend with rubble and smoldering hotspots, but also several inches of snow. For hundreds of families in Colorado, the new year ringing in a harsh reality. There's no returning home from the holidays. Nearly 1,000 homes incinerated and more than 100 additional damaged.
People are saying Happy New Year, and it's kind of far from that.
The snow has helped tame the monstrous Marshall Fire, but it's complicating the recovery process, burying what's left of torched communities. Authorities searching for 3 missing people, but they fear the worst.
We unfortunately believe these are going to turn into recovery cases. We're calling in cadaver dogs and search teams to help us with an effort tomorrow.
Nadine Turnbull's family waiting with bated breath. The 91-year-old was last seen while frantically evacuating her home, family says, but they lost track of her in the chaos.
They tried to go out the front door with the neighbor. It was engulfed. Check the back door, it was engulfed.
The Marshall Fire, now the most destructive in state history. Superior and Louisville, apocalyptic wastelands. Unrecognizable even to longtime residents like Police Chief Dave Hayes, who lost his own home while trying to save others.
I mean, you spend 30 plus years of your life there and it's all gone. I mean, it's ashes.
Yet amid utter devastation, remarkable stories of survival. Patients were able to evacuate a hospital as staff hosed down flames rushing towards oxygen tanks.
It is a miracle that did not happen.
And at a nearby mall, Catherine Lopez.
Your car was running out of gas. You were stuck in traffic. The flames are closing in. What's going through your mind?
That I just wanted to get out safe to my family. I even, told my son I left him. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get out.
But she did, thanks to a fast-acting police officer who drove her out of the danger zone.
And I'm so thankful and grateful.
Officials believe they know where the fire started, but not how. Initially, authorities thought downed power lines were to blame, but now say that theory seems less likely. Back to you.
All right, Emily Aketa, thank you so much. And now to a major development in the growing tensions between the U.S. and Russia. President Biden spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky on Sunday, reaffirming U.S. support for Ukraine as it faces growing aggression from Russia. Right now, Russia has up to 100,000 troops along its border with Ukraine, prompting fears of an invasion. President Biden spoke with Vladimir Putin last week, urging the Russian leader to de-escalate tensions on the Ukrainian border. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins me now. Mike, good morning. So what happened during yesterday's call with President Biden and Ukraine's president? What kind of support will the U.S. give if tensions along the Russian border continue to grow?
Good morning, Savannah. Happy New Year. What White House officials have said in December is that if Russia were to further escalate this situation, and by escalate they mean a full-blown invasion, then the U.S. would provide additional defensive weapons to Ukraine beyond what they have already been providing. They also would see additional troop deployments through NATO in some of those Eastern Bloc nations that border Ukraine as part of an effort to deter any further Russian aggression. What the White House is saying now, at least after this call yesterday, in a statement from White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, is that President Biden, in this call yesterday, made clear that the U.S. and its allies and partners will respond decisively if Russia further invades Ukraine. The statement went on to say that President Biden committed to President Zelensky that as we move forward into a round of diplomatic negotiations, the U.S. will stick to its principle of no decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine at the table, an important one, especially with Ukraine facing this potential Russian assault.
And now, Mike, what did Ukrainian President Zelensky say about this call? Does he think American and other Western leaders will hold up their promise of support here?
He certainly hopes so. And what we've seen throughout this standoff is that anytime a top U.S. official, up to and including President Biden himself, speaks with his Russian counterpart, the Ukrainians want to see sort of reciprocal is the term of art in diplomacy, conversations happening with Ukraine. And so President Zelensky yesterday was quick to tweet a response to the phone call, making a point of the fact that, as he put it, this was the first international talk of the year with POTUS and proves the special nature of our relations, talking about the joint actions of Ukraine and the U.S. and partners in keeping peace in Europe, preventing further escalation as well. President Zelensky, a big fan of flag emojis, as you see, as he takes to Twitter. I should mention that President Biden, in addition to speaking with Zelensky yesterday, also spoke with what's called the Bucharest Nine, the leaders of those 9 NATO countries that are also in Eastern Europe who have a lot at stake here as well.
Now, Mike, we mentioned a moment ago that this call also came just days after Biden spoke with Vladimir Putin. It was the second call between the two leaders in just the past month. Can we expect more communication between them soon? And do we know what Putin thinks about this call with Ukraine?
Yeah, well, we certainly will be keeping an eye out. Remember, the call that President Biden and President Putin had at the beginning of December was one that the U.S. had initiated, and then President Putin was the one who asked for the call that took place last week. What White House officials have said is that these new round of diplomatic negotiations that are going to start next Sunday in Geneva, first just the U.S. and Russian officials, then expanding to include NATO officials, and then expanding again to include a broader coalition that includes Ukraine. They will not include Presidents Putin and Biden at this stage. The U.S. delegation is going to be led largely by the State Department. But you can be sure, as the White House has said, if President Putin were to request another call, their inclination is typically to accept. If the U.S. is going to request one, we certainly would hope from the U.S. perspective that President Putin accepts as well.
Absolutely. All right, Mike Memoli, thank you so much. Great to see you. Happy New Year.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.